As I write this, it's early July. This story took place at the beginning of summer. I usually try to hang around my college town or travel to Europe in the summer as a way to avoid going home, but that wasn't a possibility this time around. I found myself reluctantly returning home at the beginning of the summer. I just had to make it through 1 week, and then I'd be on a plane to Germany. I didn't really feel like seeing any of my old friends, but I wasn't too keen on staying home either. So, I found myself waking up early and spending my entire days hiking, watching movies, or even just driving around aimlessly. It was my last day home. I was getting bored of the stuff I had been doing and wanted to do something a little more exciting. My friends and I used to train hop, one of the many unruly activities that I had since cut out of my life. I decided, what the hell, and drove to a secluded set of tracks I knew about. Freight trains always passed through here, so I knew there would be many options. The tracks were surrounded by trees and various flora, part of the reason I had chosen them. The last thing I needed was to be caught for doing an illegal activity after having been clean for so many years. I parked my car and made my way over to the tracks. Let me describe the layout so it's easy to understand. This specific set of tracks ran through the trees for a while before entering a tunnel. There was a very small clearing on the other side of the tunnel and then a massive bridge over the water. My friends and I used to ride the train all the way across the bridge, but since it was just me, I would have no way of getting back to my car unless I felt like walking 10 miles. So, I decided that I'd hop on the train, take it through the tunnel, hop off, and get a peaceful walk back to my car. I walked along the tracks and waited for a train to pass. It was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the familiar vibration in the rails. I quickly ran to the side and tried my best to stay out of sight. Usually, as far as I know, freight train conductors didn't care enough to report people walking along the tracks, but I didn't want to take any chances. The train passed, and I waited for a good number of cars to go by before emerging from my hiding spot. I picked a car that looked easily attainable and began jogging alongside the train like I had done 100 times before. Once I was confident enough, I grabbed hold of the ladder and swung myself up. It was pretty easy, the train wasn't traveling very quickly. As my part of the train was about to enter the tunnel, I saw a strange flash of light from up ahead. I assumed it was a spark from the train or something, but truth be told, I had never seen anything like it before. I hoped there wasn't an errant wire or something dangerous in the tunnel, but it was too late to hop off. The train started picking up speed since the tunnel was perfectly straight, and I closed my eyes as the adrenaline rush started coming on. Just then, I felt a hand reach out from the darkness and literally grab my leg. I lost my footing and nearly slipped, but my hands were firmly gripping the train. I screamed and kicked, but the train sped by before I could make contact with anything. Before I could even comprehend what just happened, I felt another hand slap against my leg. I screamed again before scrambling up the ladder, hopefully out of reach. My heart was racing. What the hell just happened? The train exited the tunnel, and I hopped off without thinking. I waited for the train to completely pass and watched it chug over the bridge. I remember pacing back and forth in the little clearing, thinking about what just happened. Like, were there really people in the tunnel, and what could they possibly be doing there? Why the hell would they try to drag me down? All these thoughts and more were racing through my mind when a stark realization struck me in the face. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was absolutely no chance in hell I was walking back through that tunnel with those people in there, especially since they'd be able to see my silhouette and I'd be walking through darkness. I sat on the ground for what felt like forever. There was no other option. I couldn't walk across the bridge without risking my life. A train could come along at any second, and the bridge was too long. I considered calling someone to come rescue me, but I wasn't even sure if they'd be able to do anything. Police weren't an option. I was breaking the law just being here. I had no choice. I picked up a rock and started making my way through the tunnel. There were 2 people in there, which I knew for a fact, but there could have been more. I had no idea. I got about halfway to the point where I felt the second set of hands when I heard something. A faint click was coming from somewhere in the tunnel. It sounded like a human clicking their tongue, but it could have been made by a machine. It was honestly hard to tell. I froze and thought to myself, continuing to walk this tunnel was a death sentence. I felt a rush of confidence and pulled out my phone. "You better stay back, or I'll shoot," I threatened, my words echoing off the tunnel walls. There was a moment of silence. The clicking stopped as quickly as it had begun. I was obviously bluffing about having a gun, but I figured it was better to bluff than just walk in silence. I then pulled up a video on YouTube of gunshot sound effects, turned up my phone's volume, and played it. It was honestly louder than I was expecting, and with the echo of the tunnel, I prayed to God that whoever was in there bought it. Without waiting another second, I sprinted full speed into the darkness, bracing myself for a fight. I didn't stop running until I had reached the other side. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. After making it out of the tunnel, I looked back. There was another flash from deep in the tunnel. This time, though, it subsided long enough for me to clearly see 2 silhouettes standing on the tracks facing me. That was it for me. I turned to leave, but as I was jogging away, the nastiest screech I've ever heard emanated from the tunnel. It sounded barbaric, definitely human, but far from normal. I don't plan on ever train hopping again. My dad has been an MTA transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall, and skinny man wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the farthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" and they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed at his office door. Sure enough, it was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, As soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So, my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office before leaving to catch the next train. He checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, he saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now, you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that the guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. And yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalk. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and, according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless, or dangerous. Who knows what he actually wanted with my dad? This is narrated from the perspective of a female. This happened a few years ago in Rome, Italy. I was walking alone along the street that leads to the train station. It was around 2 p.m. on a working day, so almost practically no one was around. There were not many shops either on that street, and the few that existed were closed. A man was walking in my same direction just a few meters ahead of me. Casually, he turned back and noticed me. It was one of those instinctive reactions that you cannot conceal. His face said it all. He was roughly 6 foot tall and well-built, not exactly the body structure you would like to see such a face on. His eyes openly said, "I've been to jail and I'm highly likely to go back again." He went along his way ahead of me and then turned again a couple more times, slowing down his pace. In a few moments, the situation was reversed. I was walking in front of him now. I didn't turn around, it was useless. I knew he was following me. I didn't hurry up, I just pretended I didn't notice him. I was listening to the radio on my smartphone with earbuds in and just simply kept on doing it. But you can imagine just how much I was panicking on the inside, all alone on the street with a 6-foot-tall criminal walking after me. I kept walking, struggling to the very last bit of my soul, acting as if nothing was happening, while desperately searching for an escape out of the situation. Then, after a few more minutes like this, I saw 2 men talking vivaciously outside of their shop. I seized the occasion and stopped right after them, pretending to scroll up and down on my phone. With the tail of my eye, though, I kept glancing beyond the two men, and I was right because after a few moments I saw him stretching his neck trying to spot me. He saw I had stopped and he was leaning against the wall near the two other men. He then turned back and went away. I'm pretty sure that I must have had a guardian angel that day who sent those two men and placed them at the right time and right place. Nothing else happened, but only because I was extremely lucky. To all the ladies out there, never take for granted that you're safe just because you're in broad daylight. And never give in to fear. New York City trains are pretty crazy. I've been groped and harassed, and I've seen things that I don't ever want to see again. My best friend and I were neighbors living in Upper Manhattan. It was summertime, and it was pretty late. It was around 8:30-ish, and we wanted to go to the west side to get some milkshakes because we always liked to go out late for little adventures. Of course, my parents didn't want us to go out late, but we kept pushing it, and we ended up going. In order to get to where we wanted to go, we had to take the subway. As we're coming back, it was already 9:30-ish, so we expected to get back home around 10. The train arrived, and my best friend and I hopped in. The train car was empty, so we sat on the chairs with two seats. As we arrived at the next stop, a man came into the same car. We didn't think anything of it until the man sat right across from us. Keep in mind, the train car was nearly empty, and he could have picked literally any other seat but decided to sit across from us. Of course, my friend and I thought that was weird, so we texted each other saying we were going to move to the next car when we got to the next stop. As we were heading to the next stop, we quickly ran out of the train and ran to a different car. We just kind of laughed it off until our smiles slowly turned into worried faces when we saw the same man coming into the new car we had just moved to. Obviously, my friend and I felt completely uncomfortable. We moved all the way down to the opposite end of the car, and the man did the same exact thing. Keep in mind, the man himself didn't look creepy. He looked pretty average, which honestly made me really surprised. But my friend and I quickly moved to the next car once we got to the next stop. We were pretty scared because we were only 15 years old, and we were females on a subway. Train going back home alone around 10 o'clock. I don't really remember how we lost the man, but luckily we did. We quickly ran back home after we got off our stop, also making sure we weren't being followed. We didn't tell our parents because we knew they wouldn't let us out again, so we just kept it to ourselves. Nothing crazy like this ever happened again to us, but now we know to be more careful taking the subway home. For anyone that comes to New York and takes the subway, please be careful because you really never know who's gonna follow you. My name is Valor. I'm 24 years old, and this was the most horrifying experience of my life. I live and work in New York City, but I don't have a car, so my main mode of transportation is the subway. It was a Saturday night. I was on my way home from a party in the middle of the night. I did this about every other weekend, so I was completely fine with taking the subway alone at night. Walking down the steps, entering the underground without a soul in sight, it was always a bit chilling. This specific station was very tightly spaced. As I was walking, I could almost feel as if I were being watched or followed, along with the occasional echoing bang-type sound emitting from an unknown location. I was early for the train, so I sat on a bench and waited. This is something straight out of a horror movie. I heard this exact phrase, "Over here, buddy." There was somebody standing on the tracks inside the tunnel, poking his head out and looking at me. It was a filthy-looking man, I'd say in his early 40s. He gave me a smile, a horrible yellow smile with at least 3 teeth missing, and I could tell that even from where I was sitting. I did the best I could to pay no attention to him, but he wouldn't go away. There was laughing coming from inside the tunnel, and then another disgusting-looking man stuck his face out as well. This man gave me a nasty smile as well before telling me to come hang out with them in the tunnel. The way they stared at me, though, their eyes wouldn't even move. It's as if their sight was locked onto me. I resumed doing the best I could to ignore them and just wait for the train. I noticed in my peripheral vision that one of the men moved away into the tunnel, returning moments later with another face. I had to look again. There was a third face, but this one was hunched over and lifeless. It looked like one of the men was holding the guy's face up. The sound of the train approaching felt like 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. I got up, ready to board the train, but when I got closer to the edge of the platform, I nearly threw up at the sight. The 2 men were going back into the tunnel, and the second man in the back was holding something in his hand, a head, just a head, like a decapitated head. They disappeared from sight onto the side of the tunnel as the train stopped. I got into the first car, planning on warning the conductor, but no later than after we left the station. I didn't want to be there a second longer. As the train began to move, I saw legs moving down the stairs to the platform, but that was it. I didn't get to see who it was. But what I did get to see as the train moved into the tunnels was a glimpse of a group of men hunched up against the railing, inches away from the train window, and they were all looking right at me. I knocked on the conductor's door like a madman, screaming it was an emergency. He opened up, and I explained what I just saw. He radioed to somebody in charge of the station as well as another higher-up of the company, who I'm sure took care of it or contacted the proper authorities or security, whatever. It seemed to take ages for my stop to come, but when it did, I practically had to hop in my walk from relief. I have since been to one party at the same friend's house, but I skipped that station. I decided it was worth it to take the extra long walk to the next station. I don't know if weird shit happens often in the subway at night. In my experience prior to this incident, it never did. But after this experience, I think I should say you should be extremely cautious when in an isolated place like a subway station late at night. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.